This video is brought to you by strawberry.me. Everyone thinks that jet engines began in World War II, but what if I told you that the first jet took off in Paris in 1910, built by a Romanian nobody had even heard of? That's right, the Balkan country that gave Count Dracula an insulin to the world has quite an interesting and unexpected aviation history. Today, we'll be talking about the dreams of one man that were far, and I mean far ahead of its time. The incredible Romanian jet-powered biplane. Henry Coander was a young Romanian engineer with a thing for the unconventional. Born in 1886 in Bucharest, he showed an early fascination with flight, even building a primitive rocket-powered aeroplane model while still in high school. After attending military and engineering schools in Romania, Coander went on to study at the first aeronautical institute in the world in Paris, graduating the top of his class. By the age of 24, his mind was buzzing with new ideas for aircraft. In an era when the Wright brothers' propeller-driven machines were barely a few years old, Coander dared to imagine something even crazier, an aeroplane without a propeller. Coander's vision was driven by a simple yet radical thought: why not use the engine's power to push the plane directly with thrust instead of spinning a big wooden fan? He had tinkered with rockets and knew about the principle of reactive propulsion. Propellers had their fair share of drawbacks, so Coander set out to design a reactive aircraft, essentially a precursor to the jet plane. Yes, this guy wanted to build a jet before jet was even a word. Question for you: why did this idea fail but others succeeded? You don't have to just wing it. High performers have also got coaches, pilots got instructors, explorers had navigators, and even the greatest engineers had mentors. So why would your career be any different? And thanks to today's sponsor, strawberry.me, you can have that ace in your pocket just like me. Hi, I'm Nick, the creator of Found and Explained, and after trying strawberry.me myself, I was kind of blown away with how powerful having a certified coach for myself is to help me untangle everything that I do here about creating videos, setting goals, and how I can make better videos for you guys. For me, it wasn't about someone telling me what to do, it was about having someone who believed in me and pushed me and also kept me accountable. And that's the real difference with having a certified coach. Strawberry.me makes personal career coaching affordable and accessible. Their coaches are all trained through ICF accredited programs, so you're not just getting advice, you're also getting expert guidance. And it's super easy. You take a quick quiz, you get matched with a coach who fits your goals, and then you start building a strategy that works for you. Heck, if you check it out now, you might even get the same coach as me. So if you're ready to stop waiting and start building your future, scan the QR code on screen to take the quiz and find your coach. The most important project you'll ever work on is yourself, and now is the time to start. Fixated on this new bold idea, Coander moved to turn his theory into reality. In 1910, he designed and built his unique aeroplane in France, likely drawing on the resources from the Paris Aeronautical School and workshops where he had connections. He even worked briefly at Gustave Eiffel's facilities in Nice. If you haven't caught up, that's the guy who built the Eiffel Tower. The aircraft was completed in time to be showcased at the Second International Aeronautical Expedition in Paris in the autumn of 1910. This was a two-seat biplane, more precisely, a sesquiplane, which sounds very similar to sexy plane, but that's definitely not the case. A sesquiplane is an aircraft with an upper wing longer than the lower, and Coander's brainchild was constructed with a mix of wood and steel. He spent no effort in making his creation as advanced as possible. The fuselage was built with a steel frame and wood and then covered in a polished lacquered plywood for smooth aerodynamics. At a time where most planes were basically cloth-covered frames that looked like kites, Coander's machine had the streamlined look of something from the future. Inside that fuselage was the heart of his invention, a novel turbo-propulsor engine. Pardon my French. In essence, it was a ducted fan powered by a conventional piston engine. Coander used a 50 horsepower Clerget 4-cylinder engine, which drove a centrifugal turbine enclosed in the nose of the aircraft. The turbine would suck in air, compress it, and send it rushing towards the back. His idea was to mix the hot exhaust from the engine with this airflow to increase thrust. His French patent in October of 1910 described heating the air channels to expand the air and produce more force. In modern terms, this was not quite a true jet combustion chamber, but it was a big leap beyond propellers, effectively an early motor jet design. Now you might be wondering, Nick, what is a motor jet? Fear not, we have a whole story about the Italian motor jet from the 1930s, which was an absolute fever dream of a design, and you can watch it right here after this video. At the time, the hero of our story simply called the whole apparatus a turbina, or turbine. His aircraft had no propeller, and all of the magic happened inside of the fuselage. Apart from the engine, the fuselage and control surfaces were quite eye-catching as well. The aircraft featured a St. Andrews cross-shaped tail, which is essentially a pair of tail fins set at 45 degrees, forming an X shape. This cruciform tail had both vertical and horizontal stabilizer functions, with the pilot being able to control it with two steering wheels in the cockpit. Turning both wheels at the same direction moved the tail up or down for pitch, while turning them the opposite would swivel it side to side for yaw. The landing gear combined wheels with skis. Two main wheels carried most of the weight, but Coander added a front skid and rear skid to prevent noseovers and support the tail. Some reports even suggest he experimented with retractable landing gears, although it's unclear if it worked. His aircraft even featured internal fuel and oil tanks in the wings, which was a first in aviation history and a design choice which is nowadays common. The upper wing was quite thick and structurally strong, enabling this innovation. And each of these innovations was remarkable because, let me remind you, this is 1910. The modern bra, or even zippers, still weren't a thing. And all of these things taken together made the Coander 1910 a truly exotic flying machine. It was heavier than those other flimsy planes of its era, with about 420 kilograms of empty weight, and was also quite large, exactly 12.5 meters long with a 10.3 meters wingspan. But Coander was confident that the turbina engine with its 50 horsepower motor could provide enough thrust to make it fly. And now it was time to prove it. In October of 1910, Coander took his new aircraft to the Paris Air Saloon at the Grand Palais. The saloon was the era's premier air show, where the latest flying inventions were displayed to the public and press. Coander's propeller-less plane caused quite an immediate sensation. French newspapers wrote articles about it, and engineers and other designers talked all about it. On December 16, 1910, Henry brought the Coander 1910 to the military airfield near Paris for experimental trials. This was his moment to prove that his concept worked. The goal was modest: do some taxi runs on the field to test the engine, and perhaps even lift off slightly. But here's the rub: Henry Coander had little actual flight training. In fact, he was not an experienced pilot at all. So, present with him were some of the fellow aviation pioneers of the era, including Louis Bourget and Gabriel Voisin, who must have been just as curious to see this strange biplane in action. Coander's own recollections of that day paint a vivid picture of the first jet flight that quickly turned into a fiery inferno. According to a letter that he wrote years later, after warming up the engine, he started rolling down the field, and the machine accelerated more and more. To his surprise, the aircraft lifted off a bit too quickly, seemingly on its own accord. Henry was caught off guard by how suddenly he was airborne, and at this critical moment, the inexperienced pilot lost full control. The airplane yawed and slipped to the side, and then came down hard, crashing into a wall at the edge of the field and bursting into flames. It was all over in moments. He was incredibly lucky to survive. In an era with no seatbelts or enclosed cockpits, the crash mercifully threw him out of the aircraft before it was consumed by the fire. It was a dramatic end to the world's first experiment with a hybrid jet-powered airplane. The prototype was completely destroyed by the crash and fire, putting an end to Coander's jet-age dreams. Well, at least for the time being. In the chaos of this accident, he also observed something scientifically extraordinary. He noted that when he tried an earlier run, the engine's twin exhaust outlets were splitting flames so intensely that he felt them in the cockpit. So he improvised a solution by attaching shields above and below to deflect the flames away. On the final attempt, those flame detectors produced an unexpected effect. The flames didn't shoot out straight, instead they started to deviate and come out against the fuselage. Coander was astonished to see the fiery exhaust hugging the sides of his aeroplane's fuselage. Busy not trying to crash, he didn't investigate further at that moment, but this curious behavior of the airflow would occupy his mind for 2 decades. Coander studied this phenomenon in depth and formally described it, and today it is known as the Coander effect. The tendency of a fluid jet to stick to the surface and follow its contour. This effect has since become a fundamental principle of fluid dynamics with countless engineering applications. How poetic that it was first noticed amid the flames of a crashing experimental plane in 1910. The aftermath of the first flight test was, unfortunately, a quiet one. There were no journalists present to record the event, and no contemporary news reports appeared about the crash. It seems Coander's claim to the first jet flight went largely unnoticed at the time, overshadowed perhaps by winter weather and the fact that officially no successful flight was actually made. Nonetheless, in Coander's memory and Romanian history, December 1910 marks a pioneering moment, the first attempt to fly a jet, or rather, a hybrid jet-propelled aeroplane. While the prototype perished in that trial by fire, its legacy lived on, growing brighter with time. Henry Coander moved himself onto other endeavours in aviation. And no, while he didn't build another jet, he actually did apply his talents to a more conventional aircraft. He joined the Bristol Aeroplane Company in the UK as a technical director and designed several successful aeroplanes with propellers. One of these, the Bristol Coander monoplane, became known as a top aircraft of its day, used by multiple countries, including Romania, just before World War I. Of course, the idea of jet propulsion would resurface decades later. In the late 1930s and 40s, engineers like Frank Whittle and Hans von Ohain developed the first true turbojet engines, leading to the first jet flights during World War II. By then, Coander's 1910 experiment was largely forgotten outside of Romania. However, he himself never actually forgot, and Romania never forgot. In the 1950s and 60s, he recounted his story of the 1910 jet plane, ensuring its place in the history books. However, there was some controversy. His own descriptions had evolved over the years, leading skeptics to question the details. But regardless of whether that 1910 hop was a true sustained flight or a brief uncontrolled leap, perhaps never leaving ground effect, the Coander 1910 stands as a milestone because it proved that an aircraft could be designed to fly without a propeller and using the thrust of gases alone. In Romania, Coander is revered as a national hero of science and engineering. The main international airport of Bucharest proudly bears his name today. In 2001, a full-size replica of the original aircraft was built and displayed in the National Military Museum of Romania in Bucharest. So if you ever visit Romania, you can flex your knowledge and visit the museum and recognize this amazing feat of engineering. Now, I couldn't end the video without answering a big question. Could a 50 horsepower piston engine really push this thing into the air? And the short answer is, not really. Coander's jet wasn't a true turbojet. It was basically a piston engine turning a centrifugal blower inside of a duct, a primitive motor jet. That setup lost a lot of power to friction and heating. So instead of 50 horsepower they had on paper, maybe only 40 horsepower made it into the airflow. To get it off the ground, his 480 kilogram biplane would need to have well over 100 kilograms of thrust. In reality, the duct could only deliver maybe 50 or 60. In other words, enough to taxi fast and maybe bounce off the ground for a second, but nowhere near enough for proper sustained flight. That's why most historians today think the famous first jet flight was more of a fiery hop. Spectacular, yes, but not the birth of the true jet power. Today, jet-powered flight is an everyday reality, and that beautiful dream from 1910 is part of the blueprint that made it happen. Not bad for a 24-year-old guy who dared to leave the propeller at home, right?